call to order. Carla?
Here.
John?
Here.
Aaron?
Here.
Sean?
Here.
Tom?
Here.
And Chuck is here. So for this evening, we will have public input on the chat function as per usual. And tonight's agenda will have 3 items. The assistant superintendent for teaching and learning timeline, and we will then vote on the resolution discussed at our last meeting, and discuss and vote on the policy IMB. So again, public input is using the chat function, and we'll try to answer if they're pertinent to an agenda item when we're talking about that, or if it's something that's not on the agenda, we'll address it at the end of the meeting. So before we get started, I'd like a motion on the consent agenda.
I move to approve the consent agenda as listed.
Second.
Second. Any discussion? Seeing none, we'll have a vote. Carla?
Aye.
Aaron?
Aye.
John?
Aye.
Sean?
Aye.
Tom?
Aye.
Chuck? Aye. Okay. And now there's no staff reports. I don't know, is Bridget here tonight? I didn't see her. Is there any, Carla, do you have a committee report?
No, thank you, Chuck.
John?
No report, Chuck.
Sean?
No report.
Aaron?
No report tonight.
And Tom?
No report, Chuck.
I do not have a report. Okay, Dr. Doherty, did you want to speak to the first agenda item?
The search?
Yes.
Okay. So in your packet is a draft timeline for the Assistant Superintendent for Learning and Teaching hiring process and search timeline and screening committee. Before I begin, I just want to thank Chris Kelly for the work that she's done for the students of Reading over the last 3 years, particularly in the areas of curriculum, instruction, assessment, and professional development. We wish her the best of luck and good health in future endeavors. Chris did submit her resignation effective June 30th last week. Once we received Mrs. Kelly's resignation, we did post the position. We have received thus far 10 applicants for the position. The closing date is April 23rd, so we do have a lot of time left before the application process is concluded. As you can see in the timeline, we have diversified all of the places that we post the position, thanks to the efforts of Kerry Meisinger. So you could see there that there are several new areas. We did something similar with the high school principal search as well, and we did get a lot of applicants for that position as well. This week we'll be soliciting members for the screening committee, and you can see that the screening committee members are listed there. We have it will be facilitated by Kerry with Gail Dowd and Jennifer Stice on it. We will have the Central Office Administrative Assistant, will be Laurie Miller, who is the assistant to the Assistant Superintendent. We'll have a building principal, another administrator, 3 teachers, and 3 parents. As was with the high school principal search, Dr. Milicheski will be involved in the process, attending the interviews and working with me in making the final recommendation to the school committee. This is a position that the school committee approves the recommendation of the superintendent. as defined by Mass General Law. The goal is to, once the screening committee convenes, is that they do their work on April 8th and April 15th in preparation for the interviews. Right now we have the first round of interviews scheduled for April 29th. It may go to a second day, as we saw with the high school principal search. We did end up having 2 days of interviews because of the quality of the candidates. So we'll play that by ear as we get closer. Then after the first round interviews, we'll have a vetting process of the pre-finalists, which would include an announcement of the finalists to the community, and then have a public process, open microphone with staff, open microphone with community, potential site visits to the district and to the applicants' districts. And then the hope is the week of May 10th have an announcement of an appointment.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Doherty. So we'll have a motion and then I'll open up for questions.
So I move to approve the assistant superintendent hiring process timeline as stated in the superintendent's memo dated March 29th, 2021.
Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Sean. So is there any committee questions? Tom?
First of all, John, thank you for putting the timeline together, and thank you for getting the position posted. As a critical position, obviously. I was wondering, how are we going to balance the parent and teacher numbers across the various different constituencies of parents and teachers? High school, middle school, elementary, different backgrounds as well. What is, I mean, 3 is a pretty small number in both cases. I understand wanting to keep the committee relatively decently sized from a management perspective, but what is your process going to be to balance those 6 open positions there?
So once we get the interest from teachers and community members, we take a look at how we can best fit and make sure all of the stakeholders are represented. So obviously we want representation from special education and elementary, middle school, high school. It may look different, that you may have a parent from the middle school and a special education teacher from the high school. So we have to take a look to see who is going to apply to be on the screening committee and then balance it so that we have a very diverse group. We did something very similar with the high school search.
And just to build on that, we have a lot of people who've been on a lot of these committees kind of over and over again. Is there a slant or a bent to bring in new faces as well into this to make sure that we're getting additional viewpoints? One of the, that's one of the things we were talking about in other committees is making sure we're trying to make sure we get parents and encourage other parents to and other teachers to engage in the process. So it's not always the same 2 or 3 as the case may be.
So I think if you look at the high school search, that the parent group, they were not on other committees.
3 of them were not, yeah.
So, we did try to balance that, and the same with the teachers. Sometimes you do have situations where you need to have some cross between committees, depending on the position or the group, but we have tried to balance that.
Okay, so that's a factor, I guess, is the point of my question.
Yes.
So
Yes.
it's a factor to make sure we provide opportunity for others. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Anybody else? Okay, looks like we're ready for the vote. Carla?
Aye.
John?
Aye.
Sean?
Aye.
Aaron?
Aye.
Tom?
Aye.
Chuck, aye. Okay, thank you, John. Okay, now we will go into the vote and discussion on the resolution. And before we start, I'd just like to make a few comments. There was a lot of discussion on the process last meeting, and, I'll take responsibility for that. Because for not, making the committee aware that, and I really want committee members and community members and staff members to know that they can always feel comfortable to, bring these things to the chair's attention and or the superintendent, as soon as it happens. So having said that, I don't think we would have been within the 48 hours anyway, based on the discussions we had. Further, I would say that, I'm glad that, that it was brought to my attention at the time it was, and that, we were able to still have a discussion but not vote, because, to me, this is a, I hate to use the term no-brainer. I mean, this is something we should absolutely be supporting and doing. And, that was kind of the sense I got from the committee members that brought it to me. And I support them for that. And also, as soon as I heard it, my reaction was, we have to do something. So, and I kind of, when I said that, I wasn't really, it took me some time to kind of step back and realize that we were within that 48 hour window. But again, this is something that I think that the committee needs to step forward and support for our teachers. And I very enthusiastically thank the committee members for this, and will support this. Dr. Daugherty, did you have something you wanted to say?
Yes, thanks. Thanks, Chuck. So please consider my remarks more global and reflective of the last several months, and not necessarily tied to any one specific situation. But obviously, I've done a lot of thinking about what has transpired. I guess since January, and maybe even before that, about these two important agenda items. So tonight, as a committee, you're going to be discussing and voting on these two items. An affirmative vote on the resolution will send a clear message to our staff and administrators that they are respected, and that harassment or intimidation will not be tolerated for the work that they've been hired to do. In addition, an affirmative vote on the policy will result in giving our staff a set of parameters on how to allow discussion of controversial issues in our classrooms and schools. Both are equally important and equally critical during a time when educators are dealing with more complex and diverse societal issues in our classrooms and are receiving less and less appreciation and respect for their expertise, efforts, and talents. The resolution that was initially proposed last week by two school committee members because of a hurtful, threatening, and disgusting email that was sent to our high school principal, Kate Boynton. What is important about the email is not the anonymity of the email, but the hurtful content of the email and the impact that it had on the recipient of the email. If a student received a similar email on their Reading email address, we would want that student to feel safe and follow the same investigatory procedures for that student that we have with Kate. This email, however, is what I would consider the tipping point to what has been several months of harassing, unjust criticism, and intimidation of our staff and administrators. One example of this is the fixreadingschools@yahoo.com emails that were sent with my name to staff and community members in January. Another is the harassing phone calls that staff received at Birch Meadow, Killam, and Central Office. The purpose of both the phone calls and the emails were to criticize the work that our principals and staff were doing on equity and social justice issues. Staff were intimidated and threatened in these communications and were told to stop their work. A third issue that has emerged is the lack of support administrators have had from members of the community in either meetings, small group meetings, or in emails. Our administrators and staff are now at a point where they are physically and mentally exhausted from the ongoing criticism and from the lack of community support. I am so proud of the work that our principals, administrators, teachers, and staff have done in equity and social justice issues over the last 3 years. It is work that has been embedded in our school improvement plans and our school committee approved district improvement plan. This district leadership team of principals and directors have been together for 3 years as a group, and many have been here longer. They are an amazing team and have been dedicated to this mission because it is the right thing to do for students. They have supported this mission with their staff, and they have done the difficult work to make this happen in our schools. This year, they continued to focus on this work, even during the pandemic, when the pandemic could have been something that would have prevented them from doing this work. Unfortunately, what has now happened is that loud voices, not necessarily the majority of the voices, are being the ones listened to. And instead of appreciation and respect, there is constant criticism and divisiveness. Feedback is always welcome and is always important, but it must be done respectfully and not in a condescending way. That respectful dialogue has not been the norm over the last several months. We all make mistakes and we learn from them, and that is part of the growing process. But when the work is not recognized by the community or the expertise of our educators is not valued, our schools and students will be impacted and will suffer. Some administrators in this district have already announced their resignations from their positions because of this divisiveness. My fear is others will follow. As a superintendent, I am disheartened to see this amazing team being dissembled one key piece at a time. Unfortunately, I can only do so much to protect and support staff. At some point, they will become so emotionally and physically drained that they will decide to leave. As for policy IMB, I have done exactly what the committee asked me to do. I worked to make the original policy that was developed 14 years ago stronger to reflect the times that we live in and the challenges that our teachers face in the classroom. I know it's not perfect, and I'm sure there'll be some great deliberation tonight on that policy, which is totally appropriate. Members of the committee asked me to reach out to those teachers and students most impacted. I did just that and took their feedback seriously, and the draftee that you have received in this packet is reflective of that feedback. Policy IMB provides the language necessary to have those controversial issues discussed in a way that encourages all sides of the debate in a manner which respects differences. It also communicates to teachers that they cannot share their points of view, except in the cases of human rights, which we all agree is important. In conclusion, as someone who has dedicated his career to the children of Reading, I am truly concerned about the school district and the community at this juncture. The divisiveness, the unjust criticism, and negative tone needs to stop. And I'm asking the school committee this evening to support these 2 key agenda items. I ask that tonight's deliberations be respectful and follow the parameters of the proposed policy IMB. Please model the behaviors that we want our staff and children to have. Thank you.
Thank you, John. I appreciate the statement. Very good. Thank you. So before we continue discussion, I'd like to have a motion, and then we'll discuss it following that.
Move to approve the school committee resolution that condemns harassment and intimidation of Reading Public Schools administrators, teachers, and staff.
Second.
Okay. Is there any?
Real quick before we
Yes.
go there, Andy, there's a Q&A comment that the sound isn't working, so I don't know if you can work to address that appropriately. Sorry, Chuck, just wanted to make sure that we had somebody looking at that.
Okay, I'd like to open it up to the committee now. If they'd like to make any comments before we vote. Tom?
So first, Chuck, thank you for your comments. John, thank you for your comments. Sean, thank you for the resolution and the time it took to put it together. As I said last week, it is, and then Chuck, to your intimation, it is a slam dunk. We should be approving this. I hope and expect we'll approve it 6-0. I think even with the conversation a week and a half ago, I guess as the case may be, I think we all were pretty much in agreement that we're going to approve it 6-0. It's just a matter of when and how and what the timeline was. I look back at this and I think as a committee and as an administrative team, we need to do better. I know I need to do better, but this could have been handled in a way that would have been universally positively done from the get-go. And I'm hopeful that when we all agree to it from, when we vote on this at a later point in time, that it will be in such a way. The language that Sean drafted, it's spot on, right? It is well drafted, it is clean, it is clear, it's a straightforward message, hopefully that the staff and administration see loud and clear coming out of this group. But I think we as a committee, in modeling a lot of things, continuous improvement, if we model continuous improvement, we ask ourselves, how could we have done better in this case? And Chuck, I appreciate that what you said, because I think this was the optimal case of no surprises, right? If we had a chance and it wouldn't have broken OML in any way, shape, or form, FYI, we have this nasty email. One of the members is working on a resolution. That would have been all it would have taken. We get emails when something happens within 2 or 3 minutes in many cases. In this case, we didn't. And that would not have broken OML in any way, shape, or form. So I would have loved that we would have done that. And I hope that we learn from this on a go-forward basis. That as an administration team and as a committee that we can and should work more proactively and keep everybody in the loop appropriately as well. But again, Sean, thank you for taking the time to draft it. I think the wording is spot on and I appreciate it. And I just hope that we model this continuous improvement on a go-forward basis. So thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Anyone else from the committee? See none now. Is that chat open yet, or is it able? Did that person have sound? Or we don't need sound.
So we do have one comment, and it says sound is working fine for that person on Teams. So it might have just been somebody else. Jeff Corum wrote in from Ridge Road, said sound is working fine for me. Okay. So hopefully it means it's working for everybody else.
Okay, so it looks like we're ready for the vote. Carla?
Aye.
John?
Aye.
Sean?
Aye.
Aaron?
Aye.
And Tom?
Aye.
And Chuck, aye. And thank you, Sean, for drafting that for the committee. Okay, now we'll go on to IMB. We already read, so we probably have to read the motion again. Yeah. So you want to read that first, Tom?
Sure. Move to approve the second reading of policy IMB.
Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Sean. Okay. Carla?
Before we, okay. Are we voting on it? We're not voting on it, right? Are we, Chuck?
We're voting on the reading. No, I'm sorry. Yeah, we're not voting on it. Go ahead and read. Sorry.
So I'll start it now. File IMB.
Move to waive the reading.
Thank you.
Second.
Carla?
Aye.
Sean?
Aye.
Tom?
Aye.
John?
Aye.
Aaron?
Aye.
Chuck, aye. Okay, Dr. Doherty, did you want to just give a brief explanation of the information that was in the pack?
And I tried as much as possible to break it down in the evolution of the policy as we went through the different iterations. So draft A is the current policy. That's unedited at all. Draft B is, I believe, was the policy that was presented to you in November, which contained the MASC language on the student-initiated forums and requests from groups or individuals outside the schools. So that those changes are strictly MASC in an update of their policy. I believe that was in 2016 that they made those changes. Draft C was a version that was developed based on conversations that I had with Carla and Sean. And then that included a definition of controversial issues, and I made some adjustments to the section on teacher planned classroom discussions to reflect that. And then draft D, which is the bulk of the changes, that's a proposed draft based on meetings that I had with the teachers at RMHS, RMHS students, regrouped again with Sean and Carla, and the feedback that I received at the last meeting from the school committee. So the major changes in this is it defines what a controversial issue is. It defines the purpose of the policy. It provides more detail and definition and guidance for the teachers under teacher plan classroom discussions. And it does make some minor revisions to the MASC changes. The policy that you had seen, I believe last time, was use the terms matters of public concern, which seemed to generate some confusion in the conversations that were at the meeting. So I went back and I did more research on what was more appropriate, and that is why I provided the backup information on controversial issues and changed it back to the original title of teaching about controversial issues and controversial speakers. So that's a quick snapshot of the drafts.
Oh, thank you, John. Is there Sean?
I think I wrote chat in the chat instead of raise. Thank you for recognizing what I was trying to do there, Chuck. So I'm not going to talk in circles about this tonight. We've talked about this a lot, and I think everybody knows where I stand. I'll just reiterate sort of one overarching thought that I have about this policy. I think it should do two things. I think it should reaffirm or affirm the role of the schools and teachers in helping students navigate some of these difficult conversations that are going to come up, because it's real life and these things come up. Also helping them learn the skills to deal with those discussions and those difficult conversations. And I think two is that it should provide a framework so that teachers and administrators understand sort of what the expectations are for how to approach those conversations. From where I sit, this new draft D is a step forward from our original drafts and all the interim drafts on both dimensions. And so, I know folks may want to amend certain little, bits and pieces here or wholesale pieces, I don't know, but I intend to support draft D largely as presented. Thanks.
Thank you. John?
Thanks, Chuck. I want to thank the student group and the teacher group that came forward to work on this. Like Sean, I support draft D. I think the language is where it needs to be for the current times. And I think the participation from the students and teachers shows that it's moving in the right direction.
Thank you, John. Anyone else? Carla?
Thank you, Chuck. I have a difference of opinion in how this process went, which I think I've iterated previously. I view some of this, these changes made in D that I can get behind. I have a different take when reading this IMB. This IMB policy is a policy that comes from MASC, right? Massachusetts Association of School Committees. The history of it, for me, is what's important. when I read this, I view this policy as a policy that protects students' rights, that protects students' First Amendment rights, right? I think when students are afraid to or apprehensive to speak their minds and talk about their opinions in class, that this policy is fundamentally being, we're not adhering to it, right? I do agree that it is to provide some guidelines for teachers on how to help students critically develop their critical thinking skills and to be able to have differences of opinions in a respectful way in class. But what I have a hard time with is, and I mean this respectfully, if you have a policy that is meant to prevent advocacy on a teacher's part, you don't go to an advocacy group to make changes on the policy. So I do agree with, there's kind of, I feel like for me, there's almost like a dividing line. I do agree with some of the changes in draft D that I would like to see enhance our policy. But fundamentally for me, this policy is to protect students' rights. I actually did reach out to Dorothy Presser, our field director from MASC, to talk to her about this issue. She checked in with Jim Hardy, who is another field director, but he also was the past policy director. So I called her and asked her kind of what's the history of IMB. Certainly if you go Google IMB, you're going to find it in many districts. You know, he did say that the policy has been in existence before his time. It's meant to, and they mentioned three things. It allows for an exchange of ideas and displays all sides of an issue. Okay, so we can all get behind that. This policy helps to ensure that students are able to express themselves. And if they're not able to do that, then the policy is not being followed. And the policy purposefully limits advocacy, right? Schools are there to provide information to help students develop their critical thinking skills. So with that lens, I can get behind some of the changes because I think some of these changes in draft D enhances the policy. So I would like to make a proposal for how do we move forward from this point. I think we need to we need to start off with our draft B and then take our changes, our modifications from draft D and yay or nay each one as we kind of go along. I think that's the appropriate way to kind of move forward with this. Thank you, Chuck.
Thank you. Aaron?
So I think I've made clear in the past that I was not happy with the original policy. So similar to John, I want to thank everyone who's been working so hard on this. So Sean and Carla, thank you for your multiple meetings and discussing this and providing input. I want to thank the teachers who provided input. I want to thank the students who provided input. And John, Doherty, I thank you for the tremendous amount of time you've put toward this singular policy. I would actually like to work off of draft D. I feel like all of those steps are steps that we agreed to, that we asked to happen. They happened. Now we have that feedback. We have that information. To go back to B feels like it negates all of that. I would rather work off of D. I'm largely happy with the way that D looks. I think that it does protect our students, but I think it also provides the necessary framework for the teachers. I think it's a joint policy. I think it's a policy to protect students, but it's also very much a policy for teachers and how to navigate and conduct these conversations. And I think I think we've sort of discussed in the past, but you know, if a teacher is not following policy, that is operational. That's not for the school committee. So I don't want to write policy with the assumption that some teachers might not be following it. I want to write policy because it's in the best interest of students and because it's the best policy for our classrooms right now. And I think that the way that D looks is much more reflective of the current times we are living in and the current, you know, pressures and real world events that our students are dealing with. So I would vote that we work off of D.
Thank you, Aaron. Tom?
So, first of all, there's a gentleman who would like to speak, but we don't have an avenue for them to speak in a public comment setting in this space. So I've asked him to make sure he types up his message, but just a note on that front. It's an unfortunate status with this platform that we use. We also have a public comment that is labeled appropriately that we can get to shortly. On this policy, you know, and it's been, first of all, I guess I appreciate all the work that's gone into it, as everybody does. I also appreciate all the emails that people send in and all the public comments that they put in. We received a letter from, you know, RMHS Star. I appreciate the teachers in there and what they do day by day. And they asked basically a question in that letter about what I meant by caucus and what things coming out of that not being in alignment. And I think it's important for me to frame that here because there's a reason why I did what I did and why I said what I said. Because what we approve here is one that should be one that we can agree on, ideally. And that group that went back and worked on it, we didn't come back as a group saying, yes, we agree to it. One, for lack of a better way to say it, set of people or person had the pen, tried to coalesce all the views and did a great job for the most part, but we didn't come to an agreement of a coalesced set of views. So in that regard, these to me are suggested changes, but as they're written, a final copy I'm not comfortable with because we didn't come back with everybody saying this is what we agreed on. If we as a committee were organized and structured in a fashion where we had a subcommittee on policy, as many school committees do, this would not have come to us because it would not have passed the subcommittee. And I look at it very much along those lines. Which brings us back to what we read in version 1, which is B, right? I think we can easily work our way through it and add in the material that we can agree to from D into B and come up with a suitable policy that we're all on the same page on. That would just be saying, we affirm and we agree to this change. We affirm and we agree to this change. We affirm and we agree to this change until we get to a final version that is one that we all can affirm and agree to. And I think that's a very important part of this process to just ignore a portion of that and say, this is the version we're voting on. To me, leaves us to the chance that we don't vote it at all. That, you know, we go, if it's possible, we go 3-3. And I don't want us to be in that way. I'd like this to be a very positive, this is the policy we're all on the same page for. This is the agreed, language that we're all on the same page for that provides the guidance for the teachers, the students, the protection for the teachers, for the students, and away we go. And gets to the better point, Aaron, that you want to get to, gets to the better point, Carla, that you want to get to. Sean, all the effort and whatnot that you put into it, RMHS Star, all the effort they put into it. But ultimately, the policy is, the buck stops here. So we've got to work through it and get to an agreed version. So for that, in that regard, that's why I suggested we go back to this, a week and a half ago, to go back and say, what are the steps to what we agree to, starting at the first paragraph. What is the motion to amend there? Second paragraph, motion to amend. Third paragraph, motion to amend. And that is the then final version that we ultimately agree to. And to me, that would get us in a better spot where we can leave this meeting with a 6-0 vote because we've all gone through the process, even if some of those votes are 5-1, 4-2, you know, whatever along the process, but we've gone to a process where we as a committee have gone through, voted on the changes and agreed on the changes that make the policy we can walk away with and say, yep, we're on the same, we agree, this is the same policy that we can all agree to. So from that regard, I'm on the same page with Carla, because that essentially was what I was asking for in the last meeting, that paused us and put us back on the table to come back here and created B, C, and D as the case may be. And I would propose we do that. We go through it and say, paragraph 1, what are the changes? What do we agree to? Can we agree to the first sentence? Can we agree to the second sentence? Can we agree to the third sentence? That's been changed appropriately. And I'll pause there. And the public comment, Chuck, that's out there is from Anne-Marie Corey, 16 Mountain Vernon Street. I would just like to emphasize that the teachers who provided input are not part of an advocacy group. We are allies for students to facilitate open dialogue.
Did you say there were 2 or just the 1?
There's one that has a full comment in there. There's another gentleman who would like to comment, but he wants to speak, and we have no way for him to speak at the current time.
Sean?
So Tom, I don't in theory have any qualms with the way you're describing. I guess I think structurally, or I think logistically, it's easier if there's something somebody finds objectionable to file an amendment to back that out. I think it'll get us there faster, personally. So that's number 1. Number 2 is legally or technically, however you want to frame it. I'm not really sure. I think draft D is the one that's on the table as the second reading. So I think that we are definitionally working from that. So I'm not sure how we, I'm not sure how we go back to B at this point or start from B at this point. B hasn't been on the table in a couple of months at least, including the last time we did a second reading.
And that was exactly my point, is that it didn't come to us in an agreed format. The last thing we had agreed to was B. And this is suggested changes. Are we accepting those suggested changes? No, not necessarily, or yes, but what we last agreed to was B, and here's a set of suggested changes. And so it doesn't say, policy to approve second reading of policy IMB draft D, right? It says to approve the second reading of policy IMB.
Yeah, I guess, I think the way you just framed it, though, gets at why I think structurally and technically what we're talking about here is D, which is the decision tonight is whether or not to approve the proposed changes, right? I mean, we put Dr. Doherty on the hook for attempting valiantly to bring together disparate views and get to a set of proposed changes, and people have different perspectives on whether that was successful, which I understand. I'm not sure. I don't really have a strong feeling one way or the other, except that procedurally, I think we're talking about D right now. So I don't know if there's something we need to do procedurally to reorient ourselves if we want to take your proposed approach.
Carla, did you have something?
Yeah, I hear what you're saying, Sean. I feel like the draft that we as a committee, the last draft that we all agreed to, is draft B. These draft D changes, I think we need to take those one by one to see if we want to put them in. Like I said, I can get behind quite a few of them. And I think that if we kind of peg them off one by one, I would like to see us walk away with a modification to our policy rather than just come to a point where we're not going to be able to push anything through. So I would like to see if we could come together to try and incorporate some of these changes from D into B. At least we can walk away with something that that the committee can all get behind.
So when we talked about B way back when, at that point, we didn't agree to B. necessarily. That was when we sent it off to you and Carl and Sean to meet with Dr. Doherty to go through it, and then at the same time, the committee asked Dr. Doherty to approach teachers and students for input. And that's from B, that's when D came out. So, you know, I hear what you're saying, but I don't think B was never agreed to. B was the document that we had at the time to make changes to, which resulted in D, right? So would Carla and or Tom agree to suggest changes that you want to make to D that could get you to where you want to be? You know where you want. I mean, I don't know. Who knows how the vote goes, but I mean, why are you so wedded to starting from B to bring in the D changes versus taking or revising changes that are already in D? Carla?
I hear what you're saying, Chuck. The draft D was not something that we had come to agreement on when Sean and I met with Dr. Doherty. So we had a more of a philosophical discussion on it. So I can say that I personally did not get behind D because of a more of a philosophical discussion. So our starting point, as far as I'm concerned, is draft B.
Okay, Tom?
I mean, I'll go there to this regard. When we voted to approve the first reading, that's what we voted for, was B, right? So to say we didn't vote for B isn't quite correct. Yes, there were some, we'd like to go have other feedback, but we didn't vote for C or D. We voted for B. And I think we can get pretty darn close to D, but I think to me, I mean, people don't like it sometimes when I use the word process, but getting to the point of agreement takes working from the point where you last agreed and working up, not working from the point of the final solution and working backwards. That's reverse of the process.
Well, but I think the fact that what came out of that meeting with John and Carla and Tom, and Sean, excuse me, and the subsequent conversations was a working meeting. We weren't expecting anybody to come back and say we voted for this or because that's not how it's. To your earlier point, it wasn't comprised of a subcommittee to vote on anything. It was for them to have a discussion. So it would have been nice to have an agreement that came out, but that isn't a prerequisite of what comes out of that. If that makes sense or not.
And I guess that's where we disagree, but it's Aaron's comment, so.
Sean or Aaron, who went first? Aaron?
Sean was before me. Did you?
No, I'm good. I was going to say the same thing as Chuck. Go ahead, Aaron.
Okay. I want to be very careful that we are not invalidating the input that the teachers and students provided. That was an important step. And, in the vein of supporting our staff and supporting our students, like they provided valuable input. To me, to ignore that and start with D is extremely disrespectful. I'm fine with taking D paragraph by paragraph and discussing it. I thought that's what we were planning to do tonight. So I don't want to spend a lot longer going back and forth on this because I do think we need to discuss the actual policy, but to me, to start would be, is to completely invalidate the feedback that we directed John to get.
Okay, Tom?
So I appreciate that feedback point, Aaron. That's why I think D is the point that we say, what from D should we add to B? Because that feedback is important, and I don't think we should invalidate it. And I'm not trying to invalidate it in any way, shape, or form. Some people may have a different perception, but that's not what the intent is here. Rather, the intent is to make sure that we get to a point where we come to an agreement, and we all come to the same page. I disagree that, just because we say go away, that the version that comes back is the version that is, what is being suggested, especially when the people who we sent away did not come to an agreement. And I keep coming to the same thing. If we had a formal structure and we put this in place with a subcommittee, this would not have come back to us because it would have been a stalemate in the subcommittee, right? It would have had to be worked out in the subcommittee. And until the point where the subcommittee come back and said, yes, this is what we then suggest to the greater committee. We don't have that, and that's why we're kind of in this problem we're in right now. But we can certainly take all that feedback and then work our way up, as opposed to saying this is the default and work your way back. I don't think that's ignoring them in any way, shape, or form. I think that feedback is valuable. There's certainly things I disagree with, but that's okay because the feedback is valuable. We're not always going to agree, and that's another thing from a societal issue, right? We've got to get to the point where we can respectfully disagree and then come to a point to move ourselves forward. So I'm hopeful that we can do just that as we go through this, but I don't. It's in no way, shape, or form. No way, shape, or form meant to be disrespectful.
Sean?
Yeah, Chuck, I think we've all said our piece on this. I think probably it's for you to sort of make a ruling as chair at this point, and for myself, I'll respect however you want to approach it. I think we'll get to the similar outcome either way.
Okay.
There is one public comment if you want to read that, if you want me to read that before you make your ruling. Mary Ann Lynn, teacher RMHS. As a teacher who works with students to navigate challenging issues, I appreciate the fact that Dr. Doherty took the time to meet with teachers and students to update the policy. I believe that the draft D is written to support all students in finding their voice and learn from their peers.
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to suggest that we start with D, as I thought that was what came back with the working document, whether it was agreed upon or not. It was still presented to us as a document of that working group, and I respectfully, we'll give as much time to the floor to Carla and or Tom if you want to kind of go through that and where you want to make changes. I think we can get to where you want to be versus D if you were making the same changes to B. So. Yes, Carla.
Chuck, just when you said that, it made me think that there should be a case for putting language in, not a case for taking language out, right? So it's not, this committee is responsible for policy. This committee, we are responsible for policy. Aside from what the teacher's input was, this, to me, this policy is to protect students. I see some things that concern me, and I don't feel like it protects students. So I don't want to start by fundamentally changing our policy to not protect. To not do
that every time we discuss a policy, we make changes to it.
Yep, but we make changes to the baselines, policy. We don't make changes to a suggested policy, right? We take an original document and we modify that original document. And we are not doing that now. We flipped. We are taking a modification. This isn't our existing policy. We shouldn't use this as a baseline. This isn't, you take original documents in any type of policy work and you make modifications to that. I feel like if we are going to start going in this direction, we're actually opening ourselves up for liability because we are fundamentally changing what this policy is about. So I have a really strong feelings on taking a document that is not one of our originals and making modifications to them. It's almost like we've already accepted them and now we want to knock some out. And it's not how you write policy.
You could take every change out and write it right back to what it was. I mean, so how is that not changing the original policy?
Because your process is backwards, Chuck. You're not starting with an original document. You start with original documents and you make modifications to them, right? If you're in construction, right? I'll take you back to when I was at the Big Dig and we did construction projects. We took original documents and that was gold. We took that document and we made modifications to it, right? And that we started with that document and you have to be very protective over that document. You cannot take that document. You can't take that document, which is fundamentally changed, and start trying to withdraw from it. It's not a logical process. You have to take the original document and then you have to add to it and make modifications to it that way. You can't, you're almost going backwards.
Well, the original document was discussed or was presented to us at the first reading.
If you want to take
the second reading, so it's the successor document isn't going to be the same as, because the committee wanted changes and wanted feedback. The successor document for the second reading isn't going to be the same as what we read at the first reading.
Our actual original document right now is IMB. Original IMB is what our district is working off of, right? Our teachers aren't responsible and aren't being judged on any modification. Our IMB policy right now is our original, if you want to take it from that point of view. That is our gold document. And
well, that's correct until we approve a second, or we have a second reading of a successor document or no successor document.
Technically not even that, because we haven't even voted on it, right? I mean, we haven't, we are right now as a district.
After we vote.
We as a district are working off of IMB, the original IMB.
As we speak, you are correct, but once we agree to any changes to it, then the district will be working off of a new IMB.
But you're making changes to the applicable document. The applicable document right now is IMB, not draft D. It's IMB.
Draft D is changes to the original IMB. And if we want to make changes to the changes that came back is what we're discussing right now. Or we could have just voted on it without any. So the original IMB is on the table to be changed by virtue of the second reading.
So that is the document we use to add to. We don't subtract from draft D, we add to the original document.
Okay,
I think if you ran this right, I think if you took draft D right now and ran it by Colby, I think we would have an issue. I think we would have a liability issue, and I think we would have greatly changed the intent of IMB. Now, whether we need an additional policy on some of this is another issue, but right now we're talking about IMB, and you can't fundamentally change the protection of students.
Yeah, I lost track of who's in line here. Sean, were you next?
I think so. John, or no, maybe John. I don't know.
John.
John was, I think. Yeah.
John, I'm sorry. John.
Thanks, Chuck. We've added and subtracted to many a policy over the last couple of years that I've been on this committee. We'll do the first reading, we add, subtract, we come back, do the second reading, we make changes again if we need to, and then we vote. That's not the original document that we're looking at. If we're talking about that, it would have gone back to C, which is the one that was brought back to us. D is the latest, greatest addition, per se, of what came to us. And in history, we've always worked off that latest document. Thanks, Chuck.
Yeah, Sean?
Not to get totally circular and metaphysical here, but I'm going to read from policy BGB, which is our policy on policy adoption. It lays out the sequence through which we do policy adoption. Is number 1, first reading of proposed policy or policies, response from superintendent, report from any advisory committee assigned responsibility in the area, committee discussion and directions for any redrafting. That's where we left off. Next is second reading and discussion, followed by adoption or rejection. The second reading is implicitly, per this policy, supposed to be based on a redrafted policy as a result of our feedback on the policy presented in the first reading, subject to redrafting per our direction. I think that's what Dr. Doherty did. I know we didn't agree on every change. Again, I'm happy to entertain and discuss any amendments to revise it. But, you know, Carl, I don't think there's any merit to your argument that this is illegal or, you know, a violation of student rights. There's nothing there. This is completely consistent with our policy around policy adoption.
I didn't say it that eloquently, but I think that's what I was trying to say. But, Tom?
So there are a ton of public comments now, so I wanted to make sure we gave some time for those.
Sure.
So Megan Howie, RMHS Social Studies teacher. The changes to the policy protect the rights of students of all views to speak their mind in class, including students with conservative viewpoints. Cheryl of Lestrade, Lindsay Street, Boston. I'm a member of the Reading Teachers Against Racism, but more importantly, I'm a parent, a Metco parent to be exact. I ask you, the school committee, why is there even a need for policy IMB or any other that set parameters around what can be discussed, how it is discussed, and the fact that it needs to be approved by anyone before it occurs? What happens to the trust we claim to have in our teachers to serve the best interest of the students? We all know there are times when time does not allow for approval. What is considered controversial conversations? There is a need to humanize students. Personally, I feel that it is sad that we are spending so much time smothering the true, open, and honest discussions of students in open space, with teachers providing the safe space for that to happen. Anne Marie Corey, 16 Mount Vernon. I don't know if I'm confused, but I thought the policy's intent was to define appropriate parameters to guide classroom discussions. I also don't understand why this document is perceived as not supporting students. Perhaps Carla could clarify this. Cheryl Lestrade, Lindsay Street. Same comment, sorry. Cheryl Lestrade, Lindsay Street. I think it's outrageous that everyone seems to keep talking about kids' mental health, but what you really mean is the mental health for some and not all. Very few people are identified by their jobs, some by their religion, and maybe even their sexuality, but no one can change the color of their skin, the cultures they were born into and represent, or who they are. When will the school committee stop hiding behind their words and stand for what is right for all students? Cheryl Lestrade, Lindsay Street. Current affairs don't have a timeline, nor do they wait for approval to transpire, so why should students have to? Linda Snow Dockster, Beaver Road. Thank you to Sean and John P. for bringing this to our attention, and John Doherty for bringing in the other important voices. Impact does not always align with intent. In this case, it's important to consider the impact of saying that we make policy without consideration for educators' expertise, experience, and recommendations. I'd recommend considering draft D and discussing what makes folks comfortable and uncomfortable. Cheryl Estrade, Lindsay Street. I apologize. Why dare you compare the document that pertains to life to building a building? Cheryl Lestrade, Lindsay Street. Isn't it more important to support our students? Linda Snow Doxer, she, her, Beaver Road. Sorry for my mistake in my previous message. Please, sorry about that, Linda. Thank you to everyone who has worked so hard to bring this policy where it is, supporting the students and guiding the teachers on how to support and encourage all students. Impact is not always aligned to intent. In this case, it's important to consider the impact of saying we're making policy without considering our educators' expertise, experience, and recommendations. I would recommend considering draft D and discussing what makes folks comfortable and uncomfortable. Cheryl Lestrade, Lindsay Street. What is the liability? There's a need to support our students, and if having safe, open conversations is a problem, how are we serving the First Amendment rights of all students? Philip Fillmore II, president of Cato, the Coalition of Us, 11 Stillaway Street. It seems that some of the language around the policy document that's being argued about is protection of one's self-interest, not the interest of the students. If you would listen to the students, you wouldn't use the original IMB. We seem to forget why we're doing this and why people are present during the SC meeting, and that's for the students and no one's own interests. We versus I. As a former student of RPS and a METCO student, some of my peers had the opportunity to learn about history, whereas I had to experience it. That's the definition of privilege. And last one, I think, Cheryl Lestrade, Lindsay Street. What about this document does not support students? I think the rest are duplicates.
Okay, John Parks.
Thanks, Chuck. I think something we're all forgetting is this is mostly a policy on topics that are planned topics. These aren't off-the-cuff topics. These are something that are already approved by the teachers, by the principals, by the committee. These are not those everyday, somebody brings something to this conversation and starts a conversation with a teacher. These are what's going to be covered in our classroom, planned out for usually a calendar year, a school calendar year. I think we're getting away from that ideology. We're going into almost everyday conversation at this point. I think we need to bring it back to this is what we're looking at for teachers to be able to base their education plans on. I'm going to leave it at that for now, but I think that's where our focus needs to be, and that's what this policy is for.
Thank you, Tom.
So 100% agree with what John just said, and also to address some of the comments that were just put out there. That is what this is for. This is not for something happened yesterday, we need to urgently talk about it tomorrow. That's not what this policy is for. The policy is definitely for planned conversations. It even specifically says, for curriculum. The previous one was school committee for inclusion in the curriculum. The newest one says Massachusetts curriculum frameworks. So it aligns to those things as opposed to an exigent threat or something that has to be spoken of now because it happened today in the world or yesterday in the world. This is not the 9/11 conversation. This is frankly not even the January 6th conversation because that's the next day, right? This is the standard, are we going to talk about gun rights? Are we going to talk about abortion? Are we going to talk? Those are the kind of topics this is about. It's not about the sudden environmental change or the sudden, political change or the sudden somebody did something horrible change. And we should never stop those conversations. And this policy is not meant to govern those conversations. I've actually said that a few times in these conversations. So John, thank you for bringing that back out. At this point, I'm going to suggest that we, I don't agree with it, but Chuck, you ruled, it's your decision. We move forward and go forward with D and then start working our way through D and see what we would suggest there. And I'll even start with that conversation. My first problem is that by the definition I have of controversial topics, I don't think it's appropriate that we should be discussing some of these at all levels. I think there's a level at which the students enter into an awareness, an ability to handle some of these conversations. And so the first paragraph that says it is important that students at all levels participate in these conversations in developmentally appropriate ways. That sentence I would like struck, or amended to specifically talk about middle school and up or something else along those lines. And my assertion here is we've made claims and we've raised concerns in the past that the mental health of our elementary students in particular has been going up, has been more challenged. The anxiety levels are rising. Having these type of conversations at that level, to me, is not something I think we should be doing. So I'll start there as with an amendment that we strike that sentence, and if we want to wordsmith it from there, I'm happy to do so.
Thank you, Tom. Sean?
Sorry, Tom, how are we structuring this? Are you motioning an amendment and you need a second? What are we doing here?
Sure. I move that we strike the sentence that says it is important that students at all levels participate in these conversations in developmentally appropriate ways from draft D of policy IMB.
Okay, I'll second, and I do have a comment, if that's okay, Chuck.
Yes.
So I don't think that language means that any topic which is controversial should be discussed at all levels, right? I don't think there's anybody implying or suggesting that that abortion rights or gun rights or whatever should be talked about in kindergarten. One of the definitions that Dr. Doherty included in the packet says a controversial issues discussion is defined as reflective dialogue, et cetera, about an issue on which there is disagreement. My daughter's class did Ritz crackers versus saltines last week. That was intended to discuss opinions, to talk about how to share opinions, how to listen to others, how to reflect on the feelings of others, right? It was from what I understand, a really sort of valuable exercise. It technically meets the definition of a controversial issue, and it would be what I would call developmentally appropriate. I wasn't upset. I don't think many parents were upset about Ritz versus saltines, right? I think that the framing around controversial issues and developmentally appropriate addresses the concerns that some of the more explosive topics would be discussed at age. Thanks.
Tom?
I was actually going to go after the definition of controversial next, Sean. So I think it is too broadly reaching. I think that is a good conversation to have the academic conversation and be able to listen and have a conversation, but I don't consider Ritz versus saltine a controversial issue, right? You're trying to get people to take sides, you're trying to have a debate, but is it really a controversial issue in the grand scheme of things? No, it's not, right? These are the bigger topics that this is geared towards. It's the next sentence that I was going to talk about was the next one, because I think it is far too broad. Personally, and personal impacts of any person can be controversial. I suppose their personal experiences are important, and we need to find a way to include that. And I think it's included in like a later bullet, number 3 or something like that, if I recall correctly. But saltine versus Ritz is not controversial as a greater controversial topic. It is a point from an educational perspective of having a discussion, a debate, hearing all sides. I agree with that 100%, but it's not a controversial topic. So my focus in this is wholly on those that are truly controversial topics and really would have a debate and discussion about age appropriateness.
Based on the volume of the Zoom call, there's a class of second graders that would disagree with you that it was controversial, but.
Aaron? You're on mute.
Sorry, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah.
So Tom, I totally hear what you're saying, and I agree there are definitely topics that are, not appropriate for younger students, and, there's the age appropriateness, but to me, that's what the developmentally appropriate ways is addressing. So if there's a way that we can say that, more clearly that you're comfortable with, but I do think that there are controversial world issues that might be worked into elementary classroom conversations. So maybe it's not crackers, but maybe, I don't know, climate change, is something that on a very basic level, you could weave into, a science lesson in an elementary classroom. But there might also be some disagreement depending on, the basis of the conversation. So I want to make sure that we're leaving the room for teachers at all of our levels to be using this policy, I guess is my point. And I worry that by just striking it, we're sort of devaluing the importance of starting these kinds of conversations from a young age. And by these kinds of conversations, I mean helping our kids learn to hear difference of opinion and argue their own opinion respectfully, no matter what the topic is, even if it's crackers.
Thank you, Carla.
I think we need to make the distinction here between what is, and this will come down under number one, what is in the Massachusetts curriculum framework, right? That was one of the suggestions that came from the teachers, which I like. So if there is a subject which is developmentally appropriate and is in the Massachusetts framework at all levels, then we don't have to worry about adding that sentence or those two sentences in, because it's already covered here, right? So we need to make sure we're talking about topics that are currently in the frameworks for each grade, right? We're not talking about subjects here that we're not talking about January 7th. We're not talking about subjects that come up because of news related events. We're talking about subjects that are already in frameworks, right? It's exactly what John Parks just said, right? These are things that are planned out already. It's not a new topic that we're bringing in. So if these two sentences to me kind of are not applicable because they're already covered if they're in the frameworks, right? So if you say climate change, if climate change is in the first grade framework and the second grade framework and the third and the middle school and the high school, then we don't have a problem. If it's not, it doesn't belong in this policy. So I guess that where my dividing line is what's in the frameworks, and if we're sticking to what's in the frameworks, then we're going to talk about how to teach that and how to present that, right? But if we're talking about things going on internationally and nationally, this isn't the policy for that. And I guess that's where my whole crux of this is coming from. This policy governs what is in each classroom framework. So when I say we kind of go to an advocacy group, I mean that respectfully. This advocacy group deals with a lot of issues that are in the public now, but that's not what this is about. We almost need a different separate policy to cover those issues. But this IMB policy is about what is currently planned for these teachers in the curriculum.
Thank you, Carla. John?
I think something we need to think about also, we've got a wide open 8th grade civics class, which has some guidelines, but is not set in stone. Where these conversations could come up. And I'd like to set this on the teachers and say, this is the policy we have in place. These are the guidelines we've given you. Make it age level appropriate. I think our teachers are going to do that. I think our principals are going to be monitoring that, which is their job. They audit those classes. I don't think there has to be a change to this. Yes, this is stuff that's already planned out, but there's no reason to change the language here. If there's something in that overall state framework that can be considered controversial, this covers it.
Carla?
John, you actually, I think, talked your way out of that. If it's in a civics class framework, right, and if there is wiggle room within that 8th grade framework, then that's covered by this policy. But these two sentences we're talking about, we're talking about across all levels, right? It is important that the students at all levels participate in these conversations and develop me appropriate ways. If it's in the framework, it's covered by this policy. We don't have a topic that potentially could be covered across all grade levels. So I think you almost talked your way out of that sentence.
Anyone else?
We have a couple of public comments that would be related to this potentially.
Okay.
6, I think, at this point, Chuck, sorry. So from the top down, Philip Fillmore II, president of Cato, the Coalition of Us, 11 Silhouette Street, Boston. What is controversial? What is a controversial issue and what isn't a controversial issue? Who is it controversial to and why isn't it controversial for others? Jeffrey Quorum Ridge Road, reiterating a comment I think I made before, expose a difference of opinion instead of create a difference in the 3rd sentence. Teresa Wiggins, 61 Terrace Park. Teachers are the experts here and able to judge what is developmentally appropriate for various ages and stages. I do not think there's a need to legislate their expertise via policy. Thank you, Aaron Gaffin. Climate change is a great example. Jeffrey Quorum Ridge Road, how about participate in such conversations instead of participate in these conversations? Donja Mahoney, RMHS World Language Department Chair. I would strongly urge the committee to keep the policy written for all grade levels. As Dr. Doherty suggested, this policy is a tool for supporting teachers and students in having difficult discussions that involve different viewpoints. It's essential to our curricula at every level that students learn how to have hard conversations that involve disagreement. By isolating this policy to only a certain age group, we are not acknowledging the need to learn the process of listening and dialogue throughout their time in RPS. Cheryl Lestrade, Lindsay Street, Boston. Again, I ask, where is the trust in teachers to develop our curriculum developmentally appropriate in the best interest of our students? Philip Fillmore II, president of Cato, 11 Silhouette. Actually, sorry, same message. Linda Snowdoxer, she, her, Beaver Road. Children at all levels are facing difficult and controversial topics, and our teachers are experts at deciding what is developmentally appropriate. Teachers need to keep in mind the needs of all children and the fact that different children have different needs. Teachers need to plan to address the emotional social development of all of their children. This is part of our curriculum that is interdisciplinary. For instance, a child in an elementary school class has 2 mommies or 2 daddies. Children bring into the classroom what they hear at home. If a teacher overhears children's conversations, a teacher might decide to plan to include books or curriculum to help children support one another. This is probably not included in the frameworks per se, but it is important for children to feel safe in the classroom. This could be taught in a developmentally appropriate way. Fillmore Philip II. I apologize. I was reading it backwards. I apologize, Fillmore. Thank you.
That all the, excuse me, that all of them, Tom?
Yes, that's all of them.
So, yeah, I just have something to say on this. So I completely understand and heard the rationale for taking that out, but, I guess we spent the first part of this meeting passing a resolution that we're supporting our teachers and our staff, and I feel like we have to give them the benefit of the doubt here, and I mean, I don't think I'm not concerned that we're going to have some rogue discussion in a classroom from a teacher that's not going to be either appropriate for the age level. So I think we need to, give our teachers credit that they're going to do the right thing. So it's kind of what I was thinking on that. So, maybe tighten up that wording a little more, but I don't know that we need to strike it out in its entirety. Tom, were you going to say something?
Yeah, I mean, I think this conversation has been helpful for me. Ironically, I think I might be arguing against Carla now by saying this to a degree, but I think the limitation that is imposed in one makes this okay. That this is reading it in the context of the whole thing, and that's important. We need to look at it from the whole perspective. It's important that students at all levels participate in these conversations developmentally appropriate ways when they're discussing controversial issues that are in accordance with the Massachusetts curriculum framework. And so to that end, I'm going to withdraw my amendment because I don't think it's necessary now, because there's a defining limitation already in place. And because of that defining limitation, I don't think I need to put that amendment out there anymore. And I appreciate the conversation because I think it opened that understanding to me. So thank you, everybody.
Okay. Did you have another change, Tom, that you wanted? Is the committee all right that he withdrew that change? So there's nothing to vote on, and I see Sean's typing. You have something, Sean?
Carla, if you had something to say on this, you should go first. I was going to.
Oh, I'm sorry, Carla.
Yeah, go ahead. You're on mute, Carla.
They may include issues which may have political, social, environmental, or personal impacts on students and/or the wider community, locally, nationally, or internationally. I think in this specific sentence, you're once again talking about issues that happen in the news. And I'm having a hard time that we are forgetting the debacle that we faced a couple of months ago. And I think this opens the door to allow more of that to happen. And I think that once again, I'm going to say we're stifling student voices. And if people think that kids feel comfortable at all levels in our school system speaking their minds, you're in a fantasy world. So there are students who are uncomfortable. It's not in every classroom, of course, but these policies and procedures are there to protect those students. And I think we are fundamentally changing this policy, and we are opening ourselves up to liability and to, quite frankly, to some kind of indoctrination that I don't think has a place in our school system. So I'm really having a hard time with this.
So, Carla, just a quick point of order. My withdrawal was on the sentence. Only the sentence. It's important that students, that all students at all levels participate. I think we just wanted to make sure that the group was okay that withdrawal happened.
Okay. I thought you were talking about both.
And then the second sentence would be another conversation. So.
Okay.
Or the last sentence of that paragraph would be another conversation. Sorry, Chuck, I just want to make sure we stayed on track with what the conversation was.
Okay, so you want, do we want to move on to any other changes?
I don't know, maybe I can offer this as a friendly amendment, but just to accept Dr. Quorum's suggestion that we replace the word create with the word expose. Can I do that as a friendly amendment? Okay.
Well, I'm sorry, Sean, I
Yeah,
missed.
Chuck,
I heard,
it's in the first underlined sentence in draft D. These controversial issues may be questions, subjects, or problems which can expose a difference of opinion. We're not creating the differences.
I see it. Thank you.
Tom seconded, I believe.
Actually, I seconded it, but I know it's a conversation time. So the word I'd like to use there is demonstrate instead of expose. Expose sounds to me like there's something hidden necessarily, but this may not be hidden. It may just be that we need to demonstrate that there's a difference or something along those lines. You know, so I could get behind expose, but it sounds like I think demonstrates a little bit better and still aligns with the intent of what's being done there. So sometimes word choice matters, and we're not trying to show that there's a divide. We're not trying to shine some light on something. It's just that demonstrating there is a difference of opinion here, and that's okay. It's okay to have a difference of opinion, as we have been having throughout this evening.
Are you all right with that, Sean, or not?
I do not feel very strongly about this at all, so that's fine with me.
So
Okay.
I'll make so is that an official amendment then, Sean?
I'm accepting. Am I accepting demonstrate as the part of the friendly amendment? Is that what you're asking?
Yes.
Yes, I am.
All right, so now we'll vote on this amendment. Tom,
Aye.
Sean,
Aye.
John,
Aye.
Aaron,
Aye.
Carla,
Aye.
Chuck, aye. Okay, now we'll return to the this regular discussion of the policy.
So going to that last sentence, I'm trying to figure out in my head if it's bound by that same limitation of the Massachusetts curriculum. So the sentence I'm speaking of is the last sentence in the first paragraph. They may include issues which may have political, social, environmental, or personal impacts on students and/or the wider community, local, nationally, internationally. I think that could certainly fit in, controversial issues within the Massachusetts framework as well. I don't think it's necessarily saying it's an urgent, current news event. So I'm currently of the thought process that stays because of the limitation of the Massachusetts curriculum again, the same reason I withdrew my previous one. And I'd like us to think about it from that perspective and see if anybody has any further thoughts on that one. That really, because any of these issues we've talked about, I'll just use a couple of the big ones again, right? Gun rights, abortion, etc. Those ones do have political, social, personal impacts on a local, national, and in many cases international level. So those ones, as big controversies, there's obviously smaller ones, would fit into that, and some of those could fit into curriculum issues at say AP government at the high school or something like that. So I think that, to me, seems okay now that we've reasoned through and talked through the limitation of Massachusetts curriculum frameworks, and so I'm okay with that staying in there.
Okay, thank you. Anyone? John? You're on
Okay.
mute.
I'm all set.
Oh, all right, because you're up there. Okay, do you want to move on to any other changes?
We have 3 public comments. If you want to pause for
Sure.
those real quick before
Yes.
we move on.
Please.
Cheryl Lestrade, Lindsay Street, Boston. Let me ask you, have any of you ever been asked by a first grader, why am I different? I like girls and not boys. Or why don't people like me because of the color of my skin by a K1 student? Life happens for some in one time and others at different times. Would this be a subject that is what one would call controversial and age appropriate? Second one is Tim Matthew, 20 Briarwood Avenue. I am concerned that it is difficult to determine where teachers' First Amendment rights end and advocacy commences. Since the return to classes last September, some teachers have prominently placed politically charged logos on course landing pages. Students have been asked to share their opinions about BLM and indicate where they secure their news by a teacher wearing a BLM mask. Another teacher recommended all students decorate their virtual lockers with indications of Black Lives Matter and LGBTQ support rather than more frivolous choices. There are examples of classroom discussions at RMHS denigrating into political firestorms with little room for differing opinions and the teacher not properly establishing a safe space. Those students who show the courage to speak are often later bullied online by peers using toxic language. Everyone encourages a forum for an open exchange of ideas for students, but advocacy must be removed from the classroom. That will be difficult when the school district is accepting $5,000 no strings attached donations to middle schools from Pegasus Springs, a group that certainly has an agenda. Anne Marie Corey, 16 Mountain Vernon Street. I would just like to reiterate my question about what about the policy of stifling students or not supporting students. Okay, that's all. Oh, one more, unless you want to hold that one.
Oh, go ahead. You all right with that, John?
Yep.
Cheryl Lestrade, Lindsay Street. Carla, we have always had discussions with students based on our lessons. Please explain why now that this policy is on the table, there's a problem that some students are uncomfortable. When was the feelings of students of color ever taken into consideration to slavery or Jewish students learning about the Holocaust?
John, before we go to you, Tom, can you, I'm not sure what question that I didn't respond to or we didn't respond to that Anne Marie Corey asked.
I think it was probably directed at Carla or I, but it says, I would like to reiterate my question about what about the policy of stifling students or not supporting students?
Okay. John?
Thanks, Chuck. I think it's tough because a lot of the public comment goes back to that every day. This got brought up in the classroom. It's not our curriculum. It's not the framework discussions that we're looking at in this policy. As much as I would like to say those conversations are going to be free flowing, you know, there are kids on either side of the spectrum that do not want to bring up their points. There are students that don't feel comfortable because their peers aren't like-minded. That happens on both sides. I don't want to. This policy shouldn't be about sides. This should be about the overall teaching of our curriculum and staying within the frameworks, which is what this policy basically tells us to do. Is going to answer 99% of what's going on. Thanks, Chuck.
Thank you. Okay, you want to move on to another change or discussion on the?
Sure. I'll put one more on the table. I'd like to get feedback from the group on, and for that matter, the public as well. I'm having a hard time understanding certain issues that are appropriate to teach across all classrooms, as long as we are holding within the curriculum frameworks. And so from that regard, I think that sentence, I'm going to put an amendment on the table, then we'll have a discussion and see if I withdraw at a later point in time, but I'm going to propose an amendment that we strike the sentence from bullet number 1, which says there may be certain issues that are appropriate to teach across all classrooms. And the content here again is, this is not the exigent crisis that we're talking about. These are the topics, and I'd like to hear more about what people think would be appropriate to talk about in Spanish and in algebra and in, English and in history and, and in biology all at the same time. I don't understand that one myself right now, so I'd like to hear more.
Thank you. Sean?
I like that line because I think I like that language, excuse me, because I think the line is very fuzzy between the exigent event and the planned discussion. Is it a planned discussion if something happens today and a principal sends out guidance for how, teachers should talk about it tomorrow morning? Is that a planned discussion or is that an exigent circumstance? What if it's 2 days? What if it's 5 days? What if it's 2 weeks, right? So that's why I feel okay about this. I think all the language we put in here about the building principal communicating, whether it's appropriate across all classes or just specific ones, is a check against, abuse of that, frankly, which I think some folks might be concerned about. And the paragraph that follows, the second paragraph in number 1 there, takes a little bit more of a more expansive view, which says, even if something may not necessarily be defined as a teacher plan discussion because it just happens sort of organically or it happens in real time in the classroom, the vast majority of the rest of this policy still applies in terms of protecting students with minority viewpoints and ensuring that discussion is based on facts, data, and personal experiences, and all the other elements that I'm sure we're going to talk about extensively in the hours to come. They still apply. So we've put in a number of checks here that I think are appropriate. I'm generally not comfortable with the idea that we are trying to shut down discussion versus ensuring that discussion is appropriate and timely and vetted by a building administrator. And I think striking that sentence might have that effect.
Okay. So, Tom, I have a question. So,
Sure.
I think the last sentence where it says the building principal should communicate whether these teachable moments should be taught. So, isn't that taking care of that? That it stops with the building principal to say whether he or she thinks it's appropriate to go across all classes, right?
So I guess that you could. I was taking this sentence by sentence, but maybe we just take that whole group of those 3 or 4 sentences right there after the curriculum frameworks topic. And this does open up for the planned events of an exigent thing in this space, which may go against the curriculum frameworks. But if it's aligned with the class that the student is in, and I've said this before, I'll say it again, I think many times these topics can be aligned to a social studies or an English class pretty easily. I have a pretty hard time saying that they could be aligned to algebra or geometry. As a controversial issue. Sure, you could discuss statistics or something about a race or something, but as a controversial issue, I have a hard time that some of these should be discussed in that space. I worry, and in fact, I've had these conversations with some parents, that when such a topic is discussed in every class, when a student goes home, it's like, what did I do today? And it becomes kind of overkill. And so I think there's an appropriate time and place to have those conversations and to open it up for both the teacher and the student. And that's probably those, in many cases, not all cases, because it depends on the topic, but in many cases, it's the English or the history class where that makes most sense. You could probably talk about climate change and science, obviously, right? If you use that one as an example. But I don't know that every case should be discussed in every class. And so that's where I'm going with this. And again, I think the next 3 sentences kind of undermine the first sentence in terms of it doesn't have to be around the curriculum frameworks anymore, in the way that it's lying out there. Yes, some things will happen organically. And if students bring it up, as the next paragraph says, Sean, I agree with that. I mean, that next paragraph says, if it happens and a student brings it up, then organize your class and have the appropriate discussion as necessary, right? But I think there's a time and place to have certain conversations, and every class in a grade or whatever doesn't necessarily make sense to me.
John?
So Tom, to your point, math class, statistics, you're looking at overall numbers. You go down a couple of grades, you're looking at percentages and then ratios. So you can work an election into multiple grade levels, by percentages, by overall AP classes. That could be your math class, and it's very fitting for those math classes. Science, the study of politics. God knows there's quite a bit of it around right now. That can roll into an 8th grade class. It can roll into an AP Gov class. It could roll into what's happening in Reading in a 5th grade class in 1870, say. We're going history. So, everything can be tied together if you wanted to. I think Chuck had a very fair point. The principal has control at the end of the day. That he or she is that administrator where that buck is stopping. Let them do their job. I think they were hired to do it, and I think we need to respect and allow them to do it as they need to.
Thank you, John. Aaron?
I guess I don't feel like we need to find that one topic that would potentially come up in every single class. I mean, I can think of controversial issues that could come up, science class, biology. You might end up talking about gender orientation. You might end up talking about stem cell research in a science class. In a math class, you might, I don't know that they're covering this, but like my son's taking financial literacy now, like maybe they touch on the fact that, the same job, a woman isn't being paid the same amount as a man, and a woman of color is being paid even less. So I'm just like spitballing, but there are all sorts of topics that are related to the curriculum, that are related to the class, that could still be deemed controversial and that could cross over to multiple subjects. So to me, I don't want to limit or ignore the reality of those things with this policy. That's what I'm wary of by taking that out.
So,
okay. Carla?
Erin, those examples you just gave actually is one of the reasons that I think this policy is so important, right? There is a set framework, there is a set curriculum, and I think we need to follow our curriculum, right? We need to follow our curriculum. I can tell you on January 7th in class, right? I think if you talk to students, how many of their classes were they spoken to about the same thing? Everybody talks about these organic conversations that happen. Were there organic conversations, or were kids listening to teachers talk about the situation, right? Besides being, it's overkill in some respects. You're opening the door up to let these topics be discussed. I can tell you that kids are being turned off by this in a lot of respects. I would like us to focus on getting back to teaching, following the curriculum, following the frameworks, and teaching. Organic situations that happen, not covered under this policy, okay? No teacher is ever going to stifle an organic conversation. They just wouldn't do it. It's not in their nature. It shouldn't be in anybody's nature to stifle a conversation. But it's this advocacy piece of it that is a problem. It's a problem in our schools. And that is what this policy is supposed to control. So if you can't, if we can't come up with an example of something that gets taught across all curriculums, then why are we having it in our policy?
So, Chuck, I think I'm next. Is it okay if I pick up from here?
Sure.
So I think there are certainly controversial issues that could be taught across any one specific or even multiple classes, right? Where I have a problem, and I can't tie it together right now, is one that should be taught across all classes. So I'd even be amenable to saying something like there may be certain issues that are appropriate to teach across multiple subject areas or something like that. But I don't think the word all is far too inclusive in terms of what really will happen and what is an appropriate use of time as well at the level, depending upon what's going. So I definitely, John, your point, yes, there are things that you could do from a mathematical ratios and percentage perspective. And Aaron, your point, some of those things are perfect to be discussed about, gender in the science class, but you could also discuss gender in a humanities class based upon a book you're reading. You can discuss it in a history based upon rights. It's kind of a stretch to say you could discuss it in a foreign language. Maybe you could if you're reading a book in that foreign language and you're bringing that in. It's probably a really big stretch to say you're going to actually discuss it and have a debate in an algebra class on a gender issue. I think you'd be really reaching and saying, well, what percentage, and then what's the debate? You're talking about facts. You're not talking about a debate at that point in time. And that's where, I think we can come to an agreement here about the reasonableness, right, of what this is saying. There may be certain issues that are appropriate to discuss across multiple relevant courses or relevant classes. And I am coming at this mostly with a high school vein, right? I agree that, when you're in elementary, there's all sorts of different things. And yes, in that case, the word class is kind of more far-reaching because many times you're covering all subjects in that one class. Right, so most of that edit I'm suggesting is with regards to the, the high school vein of this, as opposed to everything else, or even the middle school vein where there are clear, distinct delineations of subjects and class movement. I think it's more appropriate there to say relevant classes, and relevance now also still gives the oversight and the approval still to the administrator. So we're not taking anything away from that, but we're trying to say, let's be real about what are the contexts in which some of these conversations should be happening. It should be related to what the student is learning in that class, in that subject area.
Thank you. Aaron?
I just want to be clear that we're talking about policy here, that we're not getting caught up trying to mandate curriculum, because that's, our teachers know their curriculum, our teachers know the frameworks. We could spend an hour trying to come up with a topic that we think fits into every subject, but that's not really our goal tonight. Our goal is to work on a policy, and as I understand it, we're talking about planned conversations on controversial subjects, whether they were planned with 24 hours or whether they were planned months in advance. I'm uncomfortable with the tone of insulting teachers in this conversation. I think if there are performance concerns, then that needs to be dealt with. It's not even our purview. But it needs to be dealt with outside of this conversation. We need to focus on the policy. We need to focus on what's in front of us. I'm still comfortable keeping that statement in, but it sounds like, maybe we need to vote on it.
Okay. Is there anything in the chat?
Yeah, we have multiple in the chat. Leah Richardson, English teacher. Hello, and I'm an RMHS teacher and parent in the district. The MA Speaking and Listening Framework for ELA grades 9 through 12, 1D is as follows. respond thoughtfully to diverse perspectives, summarize points of agreement and disagreement, and when warranted, qualify or justify their own views and understanding and make new connections in light of the evidence and reasoning presented. Cheryl Lestrade, Lindsay Street. This is not everyday conversations. This goes back to curriculum. This is the third time I'm asking, where is the trust in teachers, and what about this document does not support all students? Donja Mahoney, RMHS World Language Department Chair. In the most recent curriculum frameworks approved by DSE and the Massachusetts Commissioner of Education, many controversial topics are deeply embedded in all of our content areas. Engaging and meaningful teaching is based on real-world problems in the world that we live in. The new world language standards, for example, cover all of these controversial topics based on student interest in current events. The controversy is not what is determined by the curriculum. It is the discussion about situations that are meaningful and directly related to students' lives in the world that we live in. I would encourage the committee not to get distracted by identifying specific topics or controversies. The building principals and content teachers are specialists in their areas of expertise. Cheryl Lestrade, Lindsay Street. Have we now come down to micromanaging teachers and curriculum? Carla, what is the framework that is not being followed? Jess Bailey, RMHS teacher. Hello, SC members. I'm a teacher at RMHS and also a member of the Teachers Against Racism group. I personally do not see a problem with Mr. Wise's suggestion to remove the phrase. There may be certain issues that are appropriate to teach across all classes, as long as any subject can address controversial issues like the ones Ms. Gaffin and Mr. Parks have raised. Karen Janowski, 30 Azalea Circle. Thank you for this discussion. I think it's also important to point out that students are dependent on the teachers for their grades, and they pick up nonverbal as well as verbal cues from their teachers, which can stifle a student's willingness to share views that are in opposition to what the teacher is communicating. There's a power imbalance in the classroom that needs to be acknowledged. This may be an unpopular view, but it's a reality. I know this from personal experience as a parent of 3 students who went through the high school several years ago. Cheryl Lestrade, Lindsay Street. Children hear conversations at home, school, in public, and they bring them to the class, and it's through their experiences that these discussions happen based on the subject of the class. Let's be real, not everyone's home life is the same, and not every student's experience is the same. So what one may bring to a subject another may not have had to face. So again, where's the trust that we have for teachers to know how to do their jobs? Cheryl Lestrade, Lindsay Street. This is real life, and the real life is flexible. Linda Snow Doxer, she, her, Beaver Road. Interdisciplinary teaching and learning is a very powerful tool that has been the subject of professional development in our schools. Meaningful topics are a powerful tool for lasting learning and investment in learning. It's important to make the teaching environment safe for students and teachers. If a teacher clears the topic with a required administrator, then they need to be supported and their expertise trusted. Fillmore Phillip II, President of Cato, the Coalition of Us, 11 Silloway Street, Boston, Mass. Where were you during 9/11? What grade were you in? How were you informed of the information? Connie Quackenbush, science teacher, middle school. Societal facts given during class will often create discussions. We should make sure to remember that we have thinking and feeling students who respond to these facts. Remember, it's our job to support the whole student.
Is that it?
That's it.
Sean?
On 9/11, I was in college as a sophomore or junior, I think, in college. And we talked about that in my business of sport class. Didn't have a whole lot to do with business of sport. I recognize that was college. The other one, and I brought this up the very first time we talked about this policy, when the OJ verdict was released, every teacher in my middle school had been prepared with, or I guess I was a freshman in high school actually. Every teacher in my high school had been prepared that verdict's going to come out in the middle of the school day. We don't know exactly when. You need to be ready that your students are going to want to have a discussion about it. And there was a degree of planning and coordination about how to facilitate those discussions. It happened for me in Spanish class. So Tom, you brought up that example earlier. You know, this is again where I get really uncomfortable with the line between planned and exigent. There are going to be times when, you know, something happens that there can be a degree of coordination, but students are going to want to talk about it when they want to talk about it. And that might be in the very first class they have on the very first day back from a holiday break or from the summer or what have you. And I get really uncomfortable with anything that would have the effect of stifling our ability to prepare for and facilitate those conversations. I hear all the concerns that if you have a whole day and a student has 4 classes or 6 classes or whatever, and all they hear about in every class is the same topic, that there might be fatigue that comes from that. But I don't, I think that's the exception rather than the rule, and we shouldn't write our policy based on those concerns. We should trust that our teachers will learn from those experiences and figure out how to index that better the next time, and do better each time.
So just bring this back. So Tom, you didn't specifically propose a change. You were throwing that out as a feeler for your thoughts.
I did propose an initial amendment just to get the conversation started of striking that sentence. But I would withdraw that and recast it as the relevant side. And Sean, I think your point is addressed by the following paragraph, where students can bring up anything they want to bring up and a conversation can happen. And yes, teachers may have to be prepared and then nothing comes up. But if the student brings it up, then it's covered by the next paragraph in bullet number 1. So I don't think there's anything that stops that from happening. So I'm going to try and recast that motion that says there may be certain issues that are appropriate to teach across all classes. I'll say there may be certain issues that are appropriate to teach across multiple relevant classes.
Which is what you said earlier.
I'm amending my amendment, which was to strike it, and I'm just going to say multiple relevant classes. Instead of striking it, change it to be multiple relevant classes. And I think that provides the ability for the teachers to have the relevant conversations, that it provides the ability for the administration to do it, but it also acknowledges the fact that there's very few topics that every controversial issue is relevant in every single class.
Any other questions on that? So we'll vote on that amendment. John?
No.
Carla?
Nay.
Aaron?
Aye.
Sean?
I'm sorry, what exactly is the amendment to replace the word all with multiple? Is that the
Multiple
current amendment?
relevant.
Multiple relevant.
Nay.
Tom?
Aye.
Aye.
So 3-3, it doesn't pass.
3-3, doesn't pass. Okay, do you want to, does anyone have another change? Sean, is that from before?
Must be from before. I'm going to try very hard not to say anything else except aye or nay for the rest of the evening.
Tom, did you have anything else there?
There was. I'm just trying to find it. I lost it. I think it was still something was saying the previous wording instead of controversial issues again. I gotta find it. Unfortunately, with this version, I couldn't edit or annotate with the image view as opposed to a textual view, so I got to go back and find it again.
Anyone else? Carla?
May I ask the committee, what would you as committee members do, or how would you advise a parent who came to you who says that their child doesn't feel comfortable expressing their points of view and in the classroom, and oftentimes will modify what they have to say? What would, if I could hear from the committee members, like what, if you heard that, what would your response be? What would you do as a committee member? How would you handle that situation? Knowing that we don't get involved with operations.
I would tell them to go to the building principal.
Okay.
And, okay. There are,
Is that how everybody would respond?
Aaron?
No, I would I would tell them to follow the chain of command. So I would tell them to first try to, maybe the parent set up a conference with the teacher to talk about it. And then, what I tell parents, if you're not satisfied with the outcome of a conversation with the teacher, then depending on your level, I think the next level at elementary is probably principal, but the next level at the high school would be the department chair. So then I would tell them to take their concern to the department chair if they weren't satisfied with the conversation and the outcome of talking to the teacher. So I would advise them around using the chain of command.
Well, as it is now, the building principals do the evaluations. So that's why I said the building principal.
I think it eventually gets there.
Yeah.
But Sean had his comment.
I was just going to say, I mean, we have a policy that dictates this. It's KE, it's teacher, school building administrator, superintendent, school committee. That's the proper escalation protocol. And we should, and we have a responsibility to listen to parents globally to think about policies and issues, that might be global to the school system, but individual circumstances shouldn't come to the school committee and shouldn't be the basis for policy decisions, right? I mean, that's why we have the chain of command. We need to leave it to our educators to attempt to resolve those things directly with parents, to be counseled and potentially evaluated by their superiors as appropriate. And if it goes through all those channels and hasn't been resolved, then it comes to us. But that's our policy. That's the right way to approach it.
Is that anyone else? John?
I honestly think it was covered. It's truly chain of command. It's teacher, in my case, department chair, could be assistant principal, then principal, depending on the situation. Carla, it is a tough conversation without a doubt. I think we've all had them at this point. And sending a friend back and saying, gee, you really need to talk to the teacher is not something I love doing, but it's not my, unfortunately, it's not our place to really hop in and say, I'll take this on. You can roll your eyes all you want. That's fine. But it's really not our position to do that. The conversation with the teacher is crucial because they're going to work with that student for a school year. And if there's an issue, better to get it out early.
Yes. Tom?
So all the answers here are policy-wise and textbook-wise correct. And that is what we do and what we should do. I think the challenge many parents face and many students face, fair or unfair, and right or wrong, whether or not it's actually going to happen or not, going back to impact versus intent, is the question of will there be, has there been retribution as a result of those conversations? And there's many parents that will not take it to that next level, and they'll tell their student to have a stiff upper lip, as the case may be, and move forward. And that's also a teachable moment. Is that the way you want to approach it? I don't know. Maybe not. Maybe it is. Maybe it's the right answer. I'm actually, this is a challenging conversation for all of us to have, but I appreciate that we have so many people listening because we're having a conversation that is a challenging conversation, but we're all listening to each other. And I hope we're not sitting here judging each other for the way in which we're asking questions. that we're listening, we're understanding the concerns, and we're working it through. And we'll get to this policy and be done with it. But there are legitimate concerns that come behind some of the comments said by people. Yes, we have a ton of phenomenal, wonderful, amazing teachers. We also have a few, and it's not our job. I'm just going to stop there. But we have a couple. There's a reason why there's the concern that's being raised. But that's the right answer is go to the teacher first, go to the department chair or principal, work your way up the stream appropriately. And if you do it, and I think this goes back to the resolution before as well, if you do it respectfully, if you do it openly and honestly, and I'm speaking to you parents too that are watching, it will be better for you than if you do it in a very negative, challenging, argumentative tone. Teachers are open to feedback too. Principals are open to feedback too. We as school committee members are open to feedback too. By all means. One of the previous public comments, mentioned other challenging issues that happen outside the school. Those should be brought to the teacher and the principal for their awareness as well. They should be, because our anti-bullying policy specifically goes against those issues as well. There's an electronic communication portion of our anti-bullying policy that goes against those. So they should be reported and they should be dealt with appropriately. And there was a pretty nasty one that happened earlier this week on Instagram. These are challenging issues. These are challenging times. But we all, as the adults in the room, have to have the challenging conversation and help move things forward. And Erin has her hand raised, so I'll defer, yeah. But we also have a bunch of comments as well, Chuck.
I just wanted to chime in. As a former educator, like as a former teacher, I would want that feedback. I would want to know if a student thought I was somehow treating them differently based on, a difference in something. So, I think we have the chain of command in place for a reason. Like, we can't expect our teachers to make changes if they don't know that there's a problem, if they don't know that a situation is happening. So I think we have to give them the benefit of the doubt. But absolutely, if a problem is ongoing, take it up the chain. I've had to do that as a parent. So I'm just saying, I'm not trying to brush off concerns that a parent, many parents have brought me situations and I've had to say, like, you need to go back to this realm. Like, it's not my realm to call up the superintendent and say, this individual kid is having this individual problem with this individual teacher. So that's why I answered the way that I did. But I just think it's important to remember that we can't expect change to happen if we're not even giving teachers the benefit of the doubt of explaining what's happening from the student's perspective.
We said we had some comments, Tom?
Oh boy, do we, Chuck, yes. So starting at the top and working my way down with everybody who has their name and address appropriately put in here. Teresa Wiggins, 61 Terrence Park. I'm concerned again about trying to legislate the expertise of teachers via this policy. I think the words are fine as they are, but multiple classes would also be fine. The words indoctrination and overkill in this discussion are troubling. Please respect our teachers. To Mr. Robinson's point, you're all just voted on a resolution to support the teachers. Allison Williams, RMHS Math Department Head. I appreciate the acknowledgement that there is room to discuss controversial issues in math, business, and science that are planned in advance and based on the curriculum frameworks. However, I would be disappointed if my colleagues, regardless of their content area, turned away students who approach them as trusted adults to help them navigate through trying times, even if there was not a discussion germane to their particular subject. That one's anonymous, so I'll skip it. Fillmore Philip II, president of Cato, 11 Silhouette, Boston. I was in 5th grade, Miss Connolly's, Mrs. Weatherby's class at Joshua Eaton. I think he's referring to 9/11. Fillmore, I never answered that question, but the first plane flew right over my head when it hit the building. I was right there when it hit the building, going to work. Fillmore Philip II, president of Cato, Coalition of Us. What if you were a Black student at an all-white school? Somebody else pick up the questions for a minute.
Yep. Hold on.
Starts at Anna Cuevas.
Anna Cuevas, teacher at RMHS. I want to point out that students of color have feared sharing their views and experience in the classroom forever. This is not a new issue. Diane Nazis, 50 Victoria Avenue. I believe that there is a difference between supporting student, discussing challenges, bringing up current events, and a teacher expressing their views and expecting students to believe, accept teachers' views, with students knowing that the teacher wants to hear. Linda Snow Dockster, she, her, Beaver Road. Often there are perceived slights that can be understood better and resolved by a conversation directly with the teacher. Often there are multiple sides to the story, and taking a step back and having a conversation is one of the skills that our students will hopefully leave our schools with. If the child would feel more comfortable because of the power imbalance, then they can have their parent present. Jessica Bailey, RMHS teacher. I think it's important for district leaders as well as teachers to recognize that students with conservative views aren't the only ones who don't always feel comfortable speaking up in class. Our students of color, LGBTQ students, female students, immigrant students, non-native English speaker students, etc., have often felt this way. We as teachers are obligated to encourage a classroom environment in which all students feel respected and have space to speak up, but we can't guarantee that any of their peers agree with them. I believe this policy is meant to guide teachers in providing space for all students, whether they're conservative or liberal, or identify as any marginalized group. Feel respected, valued, and encouraged to speak up in class. However, if anyone's political opinion involves dehumanizing another person or group, teachers have an obligation to engage in that conversation as well. Mm-hmm. Fillmore Philip II, president of Cato, the Coalition of Us, 11 Silhouette, Boston. Impact versus intent is a very good point. Connie Quackenbush, teacher, science teacher. Why not ask the parent to go to the teacher? I'm surprised that the school committees are recommending go right to the principal. Saying that principals are the reviewers says that you do not want to have an open, honest discussions. Isn't that what you were talking about all evening by saying that there will be retribution? You are saying that you do not trust teachers to be professional. Sharilla Lestrade, Lindsay Street. As a parent of a graduate of RMHS and in college, when my student was uncomfortable with things that happen in class, I had to have these discussions several times, and I had to do just that, follow the chain of command, and once I spoke with the teachers, things changed. Sometimes teachers didn't even realize how she felt because she was so quiet. The problem is that when policies are made, it does not cover one person, it covers them all. Is the school committee now taking on the new position of human resources? Anonymous. Jen Baskin, RMHS teacher. It makes me unhappy that students feel uncomfortable in our classrooms, and I hope that all students have someone they could speak to about their concerns. Another teacher, guidance, administration, etc. I feel a need to point out that teachers are uncomfortable teaching lessons currently with mass frameworks in the current climate of the Reading community. We're afraid of being fired. We're afraid of being harassed. We're afraid of being threatened. I have 12th grade students who love to ask me questions about controversial subjects because they want to know what I think and they want to have a conversation. It utterly disappoints them when I tell them I don't feel comfortable even answering their questions. Stifling the curiosity of our students and not allowing teachers to demonstrate our humanity will make school a dystopic test-taking factory instead of a lively and engaging learning environment. Linda Snow Doctor, she, her, Beaver Road. There might be parents and students who are dealing with challenges that they are not comfortable approaching the teacher. If this is the case, then a student and a parent can ask the guidance counselor to accompany them or another ally to accompany them. Sheila Lestrade, Lindsay Street. As a former student of color, mixed cultures, in an all-white school, and to make it worse, I was one that was stifled because I spent many of those days as the only one student of color, and certain conversations made me feel uncomfortable because I was colored on the outside. But the first time I shared my multiple identified my other cultural backgrounds, I was dehumanized, laughed at, and then told I am colored, not white, and I don't look Indian. What would you say to me if you were a student, if I came to you? That's anonymous. Sheila Lestrade, Lindsay Street, correction. What would you say to me if I were your student and I came to you with this problem?
There is one more above that is named. It's just under the anonymous, Chuck. It says Nicole Sella, 301 Franklin Street.
I see that, yes.
Some of these examples are being discussed by the SC members. Are they considered controversial or current events? Who or what is defining the controversial piece of it, especially when it's centered around current events? Sorry about that from before.
Okay. So we were on or paragraph 2 of section 1. Go back to the other conversation. Has anyone not spoken that put their hand up here? Are there any other proposed changes?
I couldn't find any other ones. I guess just the question, I have one question, Dr. Doherty, if you come back for a second. Number 6, we've reduced from 5 school days to 48 hours for some of these, and that's with the principal permission. Did the administration team believe that that was a suitable period of time?
Yes, they did.
Okay, thank you.
Carla?
On number 4, teachers must ensure that the reasoned arguments of all sides of an issue are given. Appropriate and fair, equal presentation and emphasis in classroom discussion. I think the period can go after given. I think the rest is kind of redundant.
So are you proposing an amendment there, Carla?
I don't know, are we going through each one of these line by line? Because I don't remember.
Yes.
Yes. So what you're saying is you would strike the everything after given.
Yeah.
Okay. Sean?
Is it, sorry, Carla, is that a motion? I'll second it and then make a comment, if that's okay.
Sure.
Okay. I actually think the second half of this is critical. I think, I mean, just play it out, right? So the reasoned arguments of all sides of an issue, an issue could have 5 different perspectives. Is it the teacher's responsibility to ensure that if no student brought up, perspective C, D, and E to introduce those? Like, I don't think it's a reasonable expectation that the teacher ensure that all sides are part of the discussion. I think, this appropriate and fair presentation emphasis piece is intended to ensure that regardless of where a given student is on the issue, that they have the ability to bring it up. It's given appropriate and fair presentation and emphasis. Striking the second half feels like it would put some onus on the teacher to present perspectives, which might sort of broach on advocacy at times. That would be a really fuzzy line. I'm not sure how that would actually look in practice.
Carla?
I guess it would matter if they're trying to develop critical thinking skills for students. I think that they would show all sides of an issue, right? And let students decide. It's not a matter of what students bring up, right? It's a matter of what's a part of the curriculum and what all sides are to certain issues.
But the curriculum doesn't define what all sides are of any given issue that might be appropriate to discuss in the context of the curriculum framework. So I'm not. I don't understand how this would look in practice. Sorry.
I have a second potential change that I would be as happy with. Instead of appropriate and fair, I would use the word balanced. So I would be okay with leaving both lines in, but instead of appropriate fair, I would put balanced. And that would be up to the discretion of the teacher as well, just like appropriate and fair would be for them to decide what maybe an unpopular view is weighted less than a more popular view.
Sean?
I'm not trying to like counter everything you say, I promise. I know it feels that way probably at times. I think balanced feels like a synonym to equal to me, a synonym for equal to me. I hear that you're saying the expectation would be that, teachers would have some judgment on what balanced means. But balanced has a particular, implication, I think. And I think we would agree. I mean, I use this example in the last time we talked about this. I used the example of GMO labeling. I think, or something like that, right? There could be a 90-10 issue. It's not the teacher's responsibility to ensure that 50% of the discussion is on each side of that issue, as long as the 10% of students who feel one way are able to have their voices heard just as often and just as loudly as the 90% of students who feel the other way. So I'm not sure balanced is any better than the original equal to me, and I wasn't comfortable with the original equal.
Anyone else? On?
I'm trying to play this one out a little bit in my head as well as the conversation goes on. This was one that I had flagged before, and as the conversation was going, I was just, yeah, I'm not sure, but balanced need not be equal necessarily. Depends on what you're trying to do from a scale perspective, right? It just has to balance out appropriately. It's playing a little. It's a little bit of wordplay, but I'm hopeful if that we can come to some agreement in that regard, that appropriate and fair versus balanced. Either way, it's subjective, right? It's who's determining appropriate and fair, who's determining balanced. Either way, it's subjective. One's a little bit more towards providing, I mean,
How about teachers must ensure that the reasoned arguments of all sides of an issue are given representative presentation and emphasis in a classroom discussion. Well,
it has the same potential intonation and connotation. I think that if we can come to an agreement on representative versus balanced versus appropriate and fair, representative could be a matter of, how is the class divided? We're going to give, 9 of the 10 kids one thing and 1 kid the other thing, and that may not be appropriate and fair. It depends on how you define representative as well. It could be worse. The more I think about it, I'm back. I think I'm probably coming back to the appropriate and fair side of it as well. I think this is a bit of the trust we have to demonstrate, and as the previous conversation, where there's issues, we need to make sure they're brought up appropriately. But appropriate and fair, it's 6 of one, half dozen of the other at this point. Really, we're word splicing. So I could go either way. It doesn't really matter. But I think appropriate and fair is doable.
so you're saying you don't want to strike that. You disagree with striking that after.
I'm saying it. Either one works, really. They're both achieve the same goal. I see Sean's point. I see Carla's point. But at this point, I think I'm kind of red inked out. And we've hit so many points on this topic.
Anyone else? Okay, we'll vote on the motion to strike section 4 after the word given. Aaron?
Nay.
Carla?
Aye.
John?
Nay.
Tom?
Nay.
Sean?
Nay.
Chuck? Nay. Okay, any other proposed changes?
We do have a few more public comments.
Okay.
Interesting, and we just missed one, so maybe we can take it back up shortly. But Mike Monahan, Bancroft Avenue. Math teachers should teach math. Language teachers should teach language. Science teachers should teach science. History teachers should teach history. Parents and not teachers should be teaching values stemming from controversial issues, given different families have different worldviews. I would like to address a potential scenario posed by another parent. If a child were to ask a teacher why they like girls instead of boys, why would a teacher be expected to educate a child in that area and not instead advise the child to speak to their parent? Connie Quackenbush, Parker Middle School science teacher. Having principals control conversation feels very uncomfortable to me. Jessica Bailey, RMHS teacher. I respectfully disagree with Carla's suggestion to cut out appropriate and fair from part 4. Not all sides of an issue deserve to be presented. A history teacher is not obligated to bring up the perspective of Holocaust deniers, for example. Etienne O'Day, 526 West Street. Please say Cheryl's name correctly. If I'm okay, if you don't mind, don't get mine. I'm okay if you don't get mine right. So hopefully, Etienne, I did yours right, but if not, please correct me. Cheryl Lestrade, Lindsay Street, Boston. I feel uncomfortable introducing any opinion in fear of being in violation, and some may feel like I was advising a student to feel one way over another. So now it's okay for me to decide what's popular and not popular? I am confused. Fillmore Philip II, President Cato, 11 Silhouette, Boston. Instead of balanced, what about equitable? That's the one I said we might want to reconsider. Jess Bailey, RMHS teacher. While it may be appropriate for teachers to present multiple sides of an issue to foster critical thinking, they should not at all be presented equally. Balanced and equal both imply that all sides should be taken at face value. A teacher should not present disproven but still popular perspectives as equally valid. I, as a history teacher, will present the argument the Civil War was a war of northern aggression, but I won't give it balanced treatment because it doesn't deserve it.
Is that it?
Yes, and I will make the motion that we change appropriate and fair to equitable. I like that word. It's a better word than the other one so far.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, anyone have any other comments on that? Carla?
Aye.
John?
Aye.
Sean? Or did you-
No, it's, sorry, Chuck, I'm not sure I was ready for the vote. But I'll vote nay.
Aaron?
Aye.
Tom?
Aye.
Chuck? Aye. Any other changes? Tom or Carla, did you have any others?
I have nothing else.
No. No, thank you.
Jess, there's a public comment, Chuck.
Yes.
Jess Bailey, RMHS teacher. Can Tom please clarify how equitable is different from equal? I think the answer to that question stems from a few pictures I've seen, and maybe it's not appropriate for this conversation, but I'll try it as best I can. If you can envision 3 children sitting behind a fence. It's okay, Jess, we can talk about it briefly. One is tall enough to see over the fence. One is just high enough to barely see the top of the fence, and one is below the fence. They're in equal circumstance in that case, but it's not equitable because they can't all see the game on the other side of the fence. So there's a couple ways you can address that. You can give them different stepping stools, right? Where one person, the middle person, gets a smaller stepping stool and they can now see over the fence. the smallest person gets a larger stepping stool and they can now see over the fence. And so they have an equitable access to watch the game at that point in time. Another way to address it is to change the fence and make it a chain link fence or something else like that where they can all see appropriately. So that's different. That's the difference I see between equitable and equal.
Sean?
Yeah, so this was the source of my discomfort, and I didn't get my raise in time before we started voting the last time. You could read this sentence with the word equitable in there to mean that it is now the responsibility of a teacher to ensure that all sides are presented equitably. So if there are only 10% of the students that believe a particular position, now they're responsible for 50% of the airtime going to that particular position. I'm not, Tom, I think if I think about the fence analogy, I'm familiar with those visuals. I think that's the sort of direct implication of the word equitable here. I'm not sure that's what any of us intended. I don't know if procedurally I can make a motion to reverse that motion, or a motion to go back to appropriate and fair, but I'm not sure that equitable means what we want it to mean in this context. So I will make a motion, and you can rule me down if I can't.
You cannot, but anybody who voted for it can.
Anybody who voted for it can. Okay.
Right.
Anybody who voted for it can have a motion to reconsider.
That's right. Yeah.
So Jess has written another comment in. Following up on Tom's explanation, does this imply that some views need more time to be presented in class because they're less popular or need more? Excuse me, I'm pressed enter too soon. That needs more attention than more credible viewpoint. And while we don't always directly answer questions, obviously we're doing it in this case. I'm not viewing it that way, but I can see the confusion. So we can go back and have that conversation appropriately. I'm viewing it more of the way of, to me, I'm looking at those children in the room that may be less disposed of engaging in the conversation as the children that are the taller, the medium, and the shorter. Not necessarily because their viewpoint is wrong or they're a denier of Nazism or anything else along those lines, but because they are more afraid to engage or other ways around that. So is there a way that we can provide the scaffolding to bring those viewpoints that aren't wrong viewpoints, but bring them into the table and bring them into the conversation in the fold, and recognize them and warrant them? And Jess just happens to be the teacher for my daughter this year, and she has been doing that this year in many ways. And it's personal analogy here. There were conversations going on in the classroom, and my daughter was one of the ones who decided to speak up in opposing view. And Jess not only encouraged that, she wrote her a private little note that says, "Thank you. It was great to see the different point of view." So in this regard, the correlation here from an equitable perspective, to answer that question, is giving the encouragement, the enticement of the less represented view, but maybe not the wrong view, to participate in the conversation. Now, who defines wrong view is obviously a different conversation, but that's where I'm going with equitable being better.
Sean?
Yeah, so Tom, I hear that. I guess it's not clear to me that what you're striving for is not encompassed in appropriate and fair. And I'll just come back to, I don't know that our objective or our mandate for teachers is to make each side of an issue equally tall. If 10% of students are on one side and 90% are on the other side. I don't know. I think we're bringing in a term that obviously carries a lot of importance and means a lot in a lot of different contexts, and I think we're using it in a way that is somewhat out of context and probably, as a result, is subject to being loaded and misinterpreted and potentially not understood. I don't know. I think we're complicating things for ourselves here.
John,
Chuck, I'm going to move to reconsider.
is there a second?
I'll second.
We have a public comment on this topic as well.
Okay.
Fillmore Phillip II, president of Cato, 11 Soloway Street, Boston. Well said, equality versus equity. Reading has a population of over 92.4% white people. With that being said, whose opinion do you think is being portrayed the most? Jess Bailey, RMHS teacher. May I suggest adding teachers will actively encourage students to participate and share their viewpoint in class discussions by creating supportive and respectful environments instead of the term equitable.
Can you read that again, Tom?
Sure. May I suggest adding teachers will actively encourage students to participate and share their viewpoint in class discussions by creating supportive and respectful environments instead of the word equitable. And we have Fillmore Phillip II. You just don't understand it because you're not a minority, so therefore you don't have to acknowledge it or the things people have to experience. Cheryl Lestrade, Lindsay Street. Again, I say micromanaging. Please tell me. 1 minute we are telling teachers it's not okay to judge and put our views, and the next minute we are asking teachers to decide what is equal or equitable without someone using it to say we're being biased.
That's it?
Yep.
Okay, so John?
I don't know how the others feel, but I actually like the wording that Jess Bailey has sent in. As far as it going into this sentence, it might make it a little more student friendly.
Tom?
I would agree that it makes it student friendly as a sentence as a second sentence of bullet 4. I don't know that it means we need to take equitable out necessarily to make sure that we're achieving the desire here. But I do like the addition, and I do like the focus. The focus is important there. That's what the focus of making sure that students feel supported, that their viewpoints are valued and considered. I think that's an important addition. I like that.
Aaron?
So I had said okay to equitable because I was actually viewing it as closer to fair than I was as viewing it the same as equal. But it seems like it's causing a lot of confusion, and that's the opposite of what we want to achieve with this policy. Like I think we really want things to be clear. So I would support just going back to appropriate and fair. I do like Jess's suggestion. I need to see it or hear it with the first sentence to sort of wrap my brain around it. But I think we should vote.
So the first thing we'll do is vote on the motion to reconsider, and then depending on the outcome of that, we will entertain a new motion for changing the wording or not.
So Chuck, just to make sure we're all clear, a vote for the motion to reconsider would put us back at appropriate and fair?
Correct.
Okay.
Aaron?
Aye.
John?
Aye.
Carla?
Aye.
Sean?
Aye.
Tom?
Nay.
Chuck? Aye.
Okay,
Okay.
so we're back to appropriate and fair. So I'll go ahead and make the amendment that Jess suggested, which is to add a new sentence at the end of 4, which says, teachers will actively encourage students to participate and share their viewpoint in class discussions by creating supportive and respectful environments, period.
Second.
Is there any Discussion on that? Okay, Aaron,
Aye.
John,
Aye.
Carla,
Aye.
Sean,
Aye.
Tom,
Aye.
Chuck, aye. And Tom is typing.
I just wanted to type it into the chat so it's easier to find because these chats aren't so easy to find. So when John goes to edit, it's easier for him to look back at it. We have another public comment. This one from Allison Abate. 8 Applegate Lane. Can someone that was involved in the drafting this version give some background as to the line that was added into paragraph 2? It seems like there has been a lot of discussion tonight concerning the teacher's right to advocacy. The line that was added seems to add a broad span of topics that could be discussed outside of the curriculum. And then one more, Fillmore Philip II, President of Cato, 11 Soloway Street, Boston. Supportive and equitable, question mark. So I think it is a good question. Well, there's a lot of good questions tonight, but I wasn't involved in the drafting of the section for number 2. So I don't know if Carla, Sean, or John, unless the rights of protected classes are concerned, wants to go in there. I have an answer from my perspective, but I'd love to hear it as well.
Yeah.
I can
Carla?
comment on that. That was actually based on the last school committee meeting that we discussed this.
The human rights adjustment.
Yeah, so human rights was changed to this. And I can't remember who made the suggestion.
Yeah, and I get.
Carla had her hand raised. Is that what you were going to say, Carla? You're on mute.
Well, part of my concern here is that we're by putting a grouping in there, we're actually negating other groupings. So I don't know if it's I feel like it's redundant, that they're already protected.
So the reason why I didn't come to this one with an edit, just to put that on the page, was exactly what Carla just said. They are protected, so there's really not a, from my view, and maybe I'm missing something that somebody else is saying, not a need for advocacy. So, but they're protected, so we shouldn't be allowing, people to attack protected classes as part of a controversial discussion, right? So a teacher should have the right in those cases to say, wait a second, stop. That's not what should be doing. This class of, this grouping, whatever the group is. And I felt like that was enough of a legal definition and a relatively restricted legal definition that I was comfortable with that from that perspective. So that is one of the reasons why I did not suggest an edit to that language earlier tonight.
Okay, thank you. Any other amendments, proposals? Okay, so I guess I don't see any or hear any. We can now vote on the amended second reading of policy IMB. So if you want to, Tom, can you just make a motion that it says it's the amended, you know what
Sure.
I mean?
Sure, I withdraw the first motion with regards to move to approve, and I will create a new motion that says move to approve the second reading of policy IMB as amended this evening.
Second.
Okay. No other discussion. John,
Aye.
Carla,
Nay.
Tom,
Aye.
Sean,
Aye.
Aaron,
Aye.
Chuck, aye. Thank you, everybody, and thank you to all the public and staff and teachers that participated. And thank you, Dr. Doherty, for all your hard work there. That concludes the evening's agenda. Does anybody have anything they want to add?
It's a good thing we didn't try to squeeze this in on Thursday.
Okay, thank you, everybody, and thanks to all the staff and IT and everybody this evening. And Samantha, see you there somewhere.
Motion to adjourn?
Is there a second?
Second.
Aaron,
Aye.
Carla,
Aye.
John,
Aye.
Sean,
Aye.
Tom,
Aye.
and Chuck, aye. Good night, and thanks again, everybody. We'll see you.